Welcome to Moment by Moment Season 4. We're so glad that you joined us. And let me just say thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for telling your friends and your family about this podcast. We're in the middle of Season 4. We have some great topics coming at you. We have some awesome guests that we're bringing on. And, right now, we're going to be discussing the role of creatives in a church. And I just want to introduce Alex and Adam. You guys just go ahead. Alex, you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah.
Welcome.
So my name's Alex. I have been in the creative church realm for probably about 17, 18 years now.
Awesome.
Started off as a young PK growing up, as my dad was in the children's pastor's ministry. So, helping from a small age. And I've been kind of in the church world from a creative to a production standpoint to a technical director, a little bit of everything. Currently, I am a production manager at the Rim Church in a part-time role. And then full-time day gig, I'm a project manager in an AV company.
Awesome. And you also have, you're about to be a new dad.
Yeah.
So shout out.
Yeah. Coming December. So surprise.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Surprise all of us.
Coming December, we're going to welcome our baby boy or girl. We don't really know yet. And so
that's cool.
we're flipping the coin on taking bets of what we're going to have. We'll find out in about 3 weeks. So maybe I'll do a comment on the podcast saying, hey, for those who listened and watched, here's what we're having.
That's a great place to be at.
Yeah.
Adam, you expecting as well?
No. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. We are done with that stage of life. Yeah, my name is Adam Mendez. I'm the music and production minister here at Oak Hills Church. I've grown up in the church as well. I did a lot of dramas, mimes, all kinds of music.
We're going to come back to the mimes. Keep going,
we all have a past.
We're not going to skip through that. We're going to talk about the mime.
I also kind of grew up. There was a local Christian church here in town in San Antonio. And I grew up, that's where I kind of spent my summers. I had family members who worked here. So and that's what I really did. And this is, I'm going to age myself. We're talking about big beta tapes. So we're not digital at all.
Wow.
I'm relabeling these tapes and Salty Songbook and Gerber and So there's some really old storied history of Christian television that I luckily was able to have a part in. And so I actually spent about 7 years working for Trinity Broadcasting Network. Did a lot of different kinds of production
that's TBN
things.
for the regular people in the room.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Did all kinds of production stuff, running audio, lighting, production for their Enlaces Spanish program, for their youth network, and for their children's network too. So it transferred very well when I came into the church world. I've been here at Oak Hills for 15 years.
Wow.
It's a long time to say out loud.
That's a long time. Especially in one church,
Yeah.
That's
awesome. And so I get to kind of help craft our services. I was here. I took this role during the pandemic.
Okay.
So I think we might talk a little bit about that today and what kind of topsy-turvy world that
Just
turned
to be
into.
clear, the role you took in the pandemic was
this music and production,
yes.
kind of figuring that out of how are we going to do services in the middle of a pandemic. So I have a lot to say, I think, on what our role can be, should be, shouldn't be, maybe even too.
I mean, it's awesome because we're both, we're all a wealth of knowledge when it comes to creative realms. And so we're all going to have different perspectives. But the first question that I want to kind of dig into is, why are creatives important at a church? When you think about the role that we came from as a church prior to the pandemic, where maybe online wasn't on the first burner at all. Maybe digital, discipleship wasn't on the first burner either. Where have you seen, why are creatives important? Are they more important now post-pandemic? Or is it always important and maybe we were just missing it?
I'm going to date myself and be the old person here at the table.
That's okay.
The church has always been late adopters to technology. When you think of every major outlet that's ever happened, broadcast, when that first started, the church didn't want to have anything to do with it. Those kind of televangelists were kind of an icky thing, and the church didn't want to really step their foot into it until they saw, wow, this reach is kind of amazing of what we can do. And you have big inventions throughout history. You have the invention of the printing press. I'm gonna go way back. That was the first time the church actually called to arms really quick and realized the globalization that we could have in spreading the gospel. You have the invention of satellites and the invention of the internet. And those are the two things that I think the church has tried to figure out what its purpose is and realize I can reach way more people, but I'm not sure how, and I'm not sure what's right and what's wrong with it. But that's the part where the church has always kind of hit this wall of too much technology just seems scary and gross to the church. It doesn't feel like a pure gospel for some reason. So you get these voices that are sometimes the louder voices that are scared to get into a digital market.
Right. Do you think it's because churches tend to hire pastors versus leaders at times, and sometimes you need both of those roles in a church realm? I mean, Alex, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. When you think of the creative in the church, especially with how churches hire and stuff, I think there is a fine line of you do need leaders to direct what the culture is doing and the pastor to focus sometimes more on the preaching side of things, because they are different realms of visions of how to organize and run the church. Because in a sense, the church is kind of somewhat of a business at the same time. I know there's probably different viewpoints on that, but it still is in a sense. So you do need leaders to run the organization. Then you need people that are pastors at heart and that can focus on being in the word and how they're going to shepherd the church. And I think that's huge. And especially when you think about the digital shift, everybody's scared of what technology brings to the church. And it's been seen as a sin, just like when people brought drums into the church. I remember as a drummer being told that young, hey, you can't play that in the church, you're too loud. But same with technology. And when you think about it now, like all the different learning habits, some people need to read, some people are visuals, some people need videos and graphics. That's why creatives are so important and why churches need to adopt that, because learning habits have changed how we're getting our information nowadays. And it's like, if you're not adapting with the times, how are people going to pick up that information?
And that's the hard part, because sometimes you're trying to be a reflection of your own community, of your own church. Oak Hills even has a interesting path of how this used to be a classroom. Like, we're literally shooting in what used to be a classroom in 2019. Max was a radio person, never did anything on video. And so even for how big Oak Hills was when we had multiple campuses, our video wasn't that great because that wasn't our focus. We were a reflection of our age demographic that mostly listened to the radio. They didn't watch a lot of television. And so why would we be putting out a lot of content? Why would we try to get a broadcast deal locally when that's not in our wheelhouse? We're not any good at it. And we've slowly kind of made strides. Max went on like a TBN. And then you realize, to your point, some pastors, they're great communicators on one subject. Some people are great evangelists and not great pastors. And they sometimes get that platform more frequently, more easily on some of these bigger networks, or get interviewed more frequently on podcasts, because that's their wheelhouse, is speaking to the general public, where a pastor is really great maybe at that one-on-one personal relationship with some people. And it's not in their wheelhouse to be able to do some of the things that they're trying to see, or that they're seeing other churches do. They just don't know how to get that off the ground because they're not any good at it.
And do you think there's a difference between the pastoring of continual education in your walk versus the evangelism, which is more geared towards just the non-believers and coming in, and how that varies on social media of, who's on social media and what's getting the traction of reach?
And so for Oak Hills, we're a large entity. So it's like you have a lot of people on the pastoral staff with a lot of different views. But what is the church's view? Because that's technically what we're here to reflect. We're not here to reflect our own personal view. We're here to reflect the elders and what we've decided as a community. This is our stances on these things. I may personally not agree with some of those stances, but I'm willing to submit to that authority. Some churches haven't even had that talk yet. They don't know where they stand on a lot of these issues. And so the idea of, okay, let's have a podcast. Well, what are we going to talk about? We can't talk about that. We haven't decided what we think about this hot button issue.
So when you guys think about creatives, where we are now, how important is it that churches are considering hiring those roles, right? So we know that people are, the online is taking over. I think during the pandemic, we saw, according to Pew Research, 42% of all adults were watching church online, right? So that tells us that people are watching it. 18% were non-Christians. So it tells us that we still have a platform even in the pandemic, because people are looking for Christ. Whenever there's a crisis, people are turning to the church. Those churches who were pre-pandemic didn't have that online audience, or didn't put value in that. Now they're putting value in it. So post-pandemic, is online still, does it have value still?
Go ahead.
I think it's huge. When you think about today, how often do you get your news or your information from the television? It's rare. Everybody's on a streaming platform, even on your TV. Like, you've canceled cable, you're on Hulu,
Cut the
Netflix,
cords. Yeah.
YouTube TV. Everybody's streaming something.
Right.
So in the thought of creatives, it's like, well, it's even more important now because everything's online. So if you're not putting your stuff online, how are you reaching more? And I think the pandemic highlighted that significantly. It brought a new light, and like what you're saying with the the facts of how many people are coming to church, how many people it increased online. It just opened up a new door when the pandemic hit because you realize, okay, they're not coming into the house anymore. So I need to go online. And it reaches significantly more people over that point of time.
So the pandemic, we here scattered, and it was like, how do we get main service up and running? Wait a minute. Spanish ministry has a whole community they meet. All right, let's figure out what they're going to do. Wait a minute. Students is not meeting anymore. What can we do? And it was this huge, like, let's just try to throw everything together. Coming out of that, once we come back into the building, some of those we weren't doing that great. So is it worth still doing it? So we pulled back from our children's ministry, our Bible Land. We did
some things are better done in person.
We just weren't good at it. We didn't have enough skill around it to be able to sustain it long term with coming back into the building. So there were some things we had to take off. I'll go a step further that the churches that can afford to hire a creative definitely need to find it. The churches who can't afford to hire, they still need to find a creative that can volunteer to spearhead doing something in the digital. And it doesn't have to be something as complicated as a podcast. My wife loves listening. There's a church in town that they just have a Zoom Bible study on a Wednesday that they share that on their Facebook account. It's something simple. And the pastor is just a really good teacher, and they're just going through the Bible. And that is digital media. That is a church of under 1,000 people who is still having an impact in their community with the resources they have.
It's interesting you mentioned Facebook. Because we were going to go there. But when you think about this is a crazy stat. 68% of adults are on Facebook. 68. So when we're talking about creatives and we're talking about how do you get your message out, right? And we're talking about how important is the role of a creative, but you know that 68% of people are on at least one of those social media, giants in a sense. Why would you not be on there? But then it's like, okay, what is a creative role? Like, let's go ahead and break down what are the actual specific job titles that you would call a creative. Let's just go for it.
Yeah. So, a creative role, that's your photographer, your graphic designer, videographer, your lighting engineer is a creative.
Your TD,
technical director, your production manager,
your floor director,
your worship leader,
person writing your scripts.
Worship leader?
I would throw them in.
Okay.
I think for some churches, the worship leader is who they're going to lean on to make all the music for whatever they're trying to.
I've been seeing worship leader be / creative director at a lot of churches.
Sure.
So yeah, are there any other we're missing?
You have your social media person too.
Oh, yeah. Social media is huge.
Come on.
Yeah. Anybody in probably a marketing role.
Yeah.
I was going to kind of add
enough.
marketing to it as well. I think it's kind of rare for church to have a specific marketer as a role.
Might be considered like your communications person, your communications director or something like that.
Or tied into social media is what we do here. So now that we have those roles listed, so if you're listening right now and you're like, we don't have half of those roles. I think the good part about it is this: knowing that you can still you do what you can do. Not everybody's called to do everything. Not everybody's called to be on Instagram because that's a whole different demographic. Maybe your demographic is on Facebook because we know that that's the older generation, 40 and up.
Yeah.
Instagram is 40 and down. TikTok is even lower than that, right? So if your goal is maybe you focus on Gen Zers and you hyper focus on them for a year and that's your focus. Do what you can do with what you have. You don't have to hire 6 different roles that you can't afford currently. And a lot of times creatives can wear multiple hats. Alex, I know you can speak to this.
Yeah. Most creatives in a church do want to dabble. They have a hard time staying and sitting still. So you'll start off in one role and you'll adapt. I started off in live sound, needed to design some graphics. Next thing you know, we decided to take church online, and now I've gone from graphics to video to production manager. It just happens like that. And I think it's one of those things where you get passionate about one thing, you've figured it out, you see a need as a creative, and that's what creatives, one of their biggest thing is problem solving. How do I advertise to this group? How do I resolve this problem? And that's the next thing that they want to focus on and grow into.
It's interesting because we could do a whole podcast on how to manage a creative, right? Because we all know how difficult it is. I started off as a graphic designer / videographer, and then to lead an online campus, and then to creative pastor. And so multiple hats is kind of innate to any creative. Adam, I know that you can speak to it as well.
Too many hats.
Right.
A whole different outfits, actually. There's literally been times I've had to like do something production downstairs, take off those and put on a jacket and go lead worship and then run to the lobby and
Lead
host
hat,
something.
videographer jacket.
Yeah.
And
It's ridiculous. I think it's important for pastors to kind of hear some of these things and realize and not get overwhelmed of what
Right.
like they're talking about too many things.
Yeah.
I don't even know. You really need to be able to take a pulse of your church.
Right.
See where are they at? Are they in a Facebook group? Are they in a Discord group or something? Like where is your congregation at? And then where are their talents? Do you have creatives there in your church that have some of these interests? Because a lot of times it's going to start off with your youth. There's going to be some kids in there who know social media, that know videography, that are really good. Yep, exactly.
All that stuff comes out of
and
them.
cultivating that at that young age where you're not necessarily, maybe you don't have the funds to be able to hire everything, but you can start somewhere and grow it into something and kind of create that plan for it, that infrastructure for it.
To your point, I mean, that's exactly it. It's creating a pipeline, right? I mean, we see that at Watermark, I got to see their pipeline of how they take interns even, right? And then they walk them into like those roles, into those young roles, and then it kind of feeds all the way up. But I mean, that's the goal. And if you're listening right now and you are like, man, that's so many roles and I don't understand like 90% of what they're saying, and we don't know how to reach people on social media. You have people that are there currently in high school, in college, and young adult age that are already using those tools, already on those social media platforms. Utilize what you already have versus hiring. Right? We're not proponents of saying like hire full-time roles for all this when you can't afford it, or that's not your core demographic. Focus, keep the main thing, but you also need a future cast for where you're going. And to your point of even saying where you're at now, but also think about the vision of where you want to go. So in 2 years, where do you want to be? In 5 years, where do you want to be? In 5 years, will you still have the same people in the same roles and your core demographic is still the same core demographic? Or are you like, you know what? This is the way we want to reach the next generation. Tap on the people that are already there, that are already on those social media platforms.
And there's great resources online too that a pastor can go to, or a creative director at a smaller church can go to. Well, but like
quick plug.
I can think of a couple different. Salt University is one of those that it's like they have a bunch of resources for smaller churches of how to get something off the ground. Because that can kind of be the daunting task. Even for this room, it was kind of that. Like we have a blank canvas of a classroom. I have no idea what we can actually do with it. And it kind of can help with kind of step by step, what equipment to purchase. Maybe you're not going to go straight to a certain kind of microphone. You're going to need to go plug in straight to a laptop. You're not going to be able to have a whole board and a digital console and a bunch of cameras. You might have to start shooting on an iPhone first and show your pastor.
There have been movies shot.
The benefit of it all.
Be faithful with the little things. And you can show your pastor, hey, if we did this, look how many views we can get with this. Look what our reach can be with this. Because ultimately what we're talking about is spreading the gospel. We're not talking about 100%. Doing stuff in order to be cool, in order to be trendy. We're talking about being able to meet people in the place where they are so that they can hear a life-changing message that will change their community forever.
Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about Salt, I'd say that's an incredible resource. And when you think about it, like there are these smaller churches that can't afford a full-time creative in almost any role, but some churches can afford that license, that class to invest in those younger generations, to disciple them, to allow them to grow and allow them to practice that stuff. And maybe you can be the one that provides the class, provides the equipment, and gives, some young kid the passion to grow. I've got several youth students who are now running recording studios in California. That's awesome. Leading small groups at Dallas University and are in charge of like the student ministry. It's insane. That came through youth group, and they were interested in music, and we just gave them the opportunity to get hands-on, invested in them. Even if we don't have the knowledge, there's classes out there that have that. Salt University, Philo, what is it? Churchfront, social media and online. They do tons of stuff for smaller churches getting started and larger churches on larger scales.
Church Online has a bunch of resources as well too.
Life Church puts out a lot of free content, a lot of tutorials and things like that. And all right, so when we're talking about your point of view, you're saying those young guys that you kind of got to bring up, and now they're out doing things. For each of us, we had somebody say, hey, listen, I want you to come over here and learn this board or pick up this camera. I think it'll be neat. I mean, so even challenging the people that you have it's really, really challenging them. But I want to speak to the frustrated creative right now. All right. We've all been in a place or at a place, but we've been in a place where resources were tight. And so if you're listening right now, you're like, man, you guys are mentioning cameras, live streaming, boards. We don't have any of that, right? We just have maybe one Blackmagic like board and we got one camera. Like we're just trying to make it happen. What would you say to somebody who's frustrated right now because lack of resources and then lack of hiring? So at times it could be the vision of the pastor may not line up with the new digital world. And so hiring that new role isn't going to happen. And so that it kind of falls on one person or two people or three people even. What would you tell that person that's really frustrated, but wanting to reach people, the next generation and live stream or be on social media, digital discipleship podcast or whatever they're trying to launch? What would you tell that person and how would you encourage them?
I would say be faithful to your calling. What is God calling you to do? Not what is the enemy putting in your way? What is God calling you to do? And how can you persevere?
Yep.
In the face of trial, knowing that we're not wrestling against flesh and blood.
Right.
The pastor is not your enemy. The church board is not your enemy. If you need to be better at casting a vision, that's something you need to work on. If you need to have a better end product and maybe you're not looking at your editing the way it accurately is, maybe you just think you're hot stuff and you might not actually be that. You have to have a very critical eye. But to the point earlier, like you need to just be faithful in those little things and know that God is going to either provide or open another door that you may not see in that moment. But I think there's some amount of persistence that needs to be there, because I think to some point creatives struggle with self-confidence. We do things for people's approval.
Right.
And when we're putting ourselves in our art, when we hear criticism of that art, it's criticism of ourselves. Yeah. And there needs to be some amount of detachment that happens once that product is finished in order for you to receive that criticism. And know that you're not going to, doesn't matter what your budget is, doesn't matter how big of a church you are, you're never going to get everything you're asking for. There are going to be people who are in charge of the funds who have a better grip on reality than you probably do. 100%. And you need to be able to adjust and use the resources that you have.
That's good.
I think there's a little bit of it's a crazy word, lust for production and creative when you start looking at other churches.
And
it happens when you go to conferences, you watch stuff online, you're like, I need to have that. I need to design like that. We need more people. I need. And then there's the, which is huge. And I think that's the hard part of knowing, hey, there was a pastor at a youth camp and he talked about, I can't remember the full story, so I'm going to jack all this up. But he talked about, you want to be a turtle on a fence post. Like you want to be something that you never imagined you could get there. And it was so simple, but somehow God used you and moved you to that point. You couldn't have done it by yourself. Yep. And it's like, it's such a minimal thing. It's a small little tiny turtle that couldn't have climbed a fence post, couldn't have done it on his own and just used whatever he had, which was just walking around slowly, and God have moved him. And, it's relating to the fact that like, you may not have it all, but you are going to use whatever you've got to the best of your ability, just like you're saying, to figure out what God's going to do with it to reach. And it's 100% comes down to the demographic. You don't have to be the best video editor. You don't have to be all the best of this. If God's called you to do just this, then focus on that. Yeah. And I think the hard part is the pride of being able to say, I'm designing for the church congregation, not for myself. Yeah. And who am I actually talking to? Who am I reaching to? And then the hard part is, linking in the burnout when you're talking about, I want to do everything is where's that burnout line of, and that comes back to the calling. Yeah.
And I mean, fighting burnout is, you fight it with a community. You fight it with being able to vent and be able to have healthy communication with people who can also relate to what you're going through. And so I'd say if you're feeling that frustration, you're listening right now and you're saying, man, I don't have half the gear. I feel like I'm, feel inadequate because I don't have help and I don't know how to do it. Well, we kind of already laid out some places to go and visit, but also take heart in knowing that, like to your point, Adam, your identity should be rooted in Christ. It's not rooted in your work. And that is hard for a creative to let go of that and say, I put 20 hours into this video edit. I was here all day shooting and all day night. And like I sweated through 3 t-shirts. And you didn't like it or you don't see the value in it. Now I don't see the value in myself. And then you go to a church conference, right? And they have these crazy cameras. Yeah. They got the crazy Ursas and the RE lights, the sky panels. And you're like, then you go back to your church, you're feeling inadequate. Plus you're feeling like you don't have what it takes to succeed. And so I've seen it a lot in creatives where they look at what other people are doing and then they look at themselves and they look at their leadership and they're like, well, I wish the grass is greener over there. And that complex, let me tell you something. The grass isn't greener. I know you guys have heard this, but it's green where you water it. So run to Christ as your identity, because you got to be rooted in Christ, and then it doesn't hit as much. And times will get better. I mean, that's just the reality, right? Where you're at now, sometimes I know for myself, I've made it bigger than what it really was. Sure. I'm like, if only I had this, or if
Yeah.
only I had that gear,
Yeah.
or if we had like 6 more people, like
Yeah.
it would all be so much easier. And the reality is there are problems at every single church.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and you two hit on the two bigger things as creatives. We need to look into ourselves and ask God to deal with pride and jealousy,
Oh yeah.
because those are the two things that are going to torpedo not only the ministry that we're trying to create, but the gospel going out. If all I'm concerned about is what other people have, if all I'm concerned about is what I didn't get my way, or who didn't like something I did, then I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. Like that is not the point of any of this.
None of it's worth it at that point.
Yeah. Now, yes, there can be toxic leadership. Yes, there can be people who are just not going to hear you. And those can be real situations that you're going to have to overcome. You're going to need to get maybe some wise counsel on how to deal with that, because those are real. I don't want to say that, you should just stick around with an abusive leader or something like that.
No.
Yeah.
So there are situations you may have to navigate that you might be a young creative and just not sure, but you might be getting taken advantage of. You're putting in hours and hours of work and they're not hiring you. And you maybe need to have a come to Jesus with a pastor, with an administrator about it. You may need to look at self-funding through a private business that you have. And then that's going to be able to do. So funny enough, that's what I used to do way back in the day when I was in charge of our youth group. I had a job and I was living at home, and so my job essentially just paid for me to be able to do the ministry. I just put all my money that I was making into the ministry that I was doing, because the church was so small. You're talking about 500 people church,
Yeah.
But that's sometimes the reality. And when you're faithful in that, then you start to get more. I started at Oak Hills as a part-time videographer, and that's all we had was one part-time videographer.
You were it. You were
and
the
we
creative
had
team.
3 campuses at that point.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know how I'm supposed to do all of this, but you make do, you show your value, you show your work ethic, and then you get a little bit more, and then you get a little bit more. It's never going to come at the time you think. But there has been multiple times where I got blessed with some more resources than I could have imagined.
Right. And let me also add this. You don't understand the value that you bring until, like, you may never actually understand the value you bring. You may not understand the impact that you have. So you might be editing a video, but somebody's watching that on social media. Somebody's on YouTube. Somebody's watching it, and they're receiving life-changing messages from what you've touched. And you don't understand how often that happens, where we don't understand the impact that we can have. And it's not in pride, right? But it's all about, just if you're feeling frustrated, just realize and recognize that the work that you do, man, it goes beyond state lines. It goes beyond countries, borders. I mean, you could be reaching people with the gospel message all the way across the seas, and you're frustrated because you don't have a second camera. But the reality is, God is using what you're doing now the same way that he used so many people in the Bible with gifts that they didn't feel like were that great. He changed the nation.
I can give you one example. I was getting really frustrated at our quality of our Sunday broadcast. And I started pulling analytics to show, hey guys, look how many people are watching, and we're putting out a subpar product. God ended up speaking to me and say, look how many people I'm reaching, not you're reaching with the gospel, with the message. And then I started to just go and look at our numbers on Vimeo as a way to encourage myself rather than a way to disparage the work we were doing. And realize each one of those views, that's a life. Sometimes that's a few lives. Sometimes that's like a house church or views in Africa to our missions teams that we're watching with a whole group of people.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, wow. And I'm here just griping because I wanted the new best.
Next
brightest
camera,
thing.
whatever.
Yeah.
When we think about practicals, all right, I want people to leave with some practicals. So if you're at somebody listening right now, they're at a smaller church. Maybe let's say they have one creative on their team. What should they be focusing on? What are some things they can do? What are some videos they can put out? All right, so I'm gonna go first. I want you guys to be thinking about it. So what I would suggest is, if you're a smaller church with maybe one creative on staff, so that's limited resources, I would stay, if you're not doing it, start cutting up your sermon into smaller bites for social media. That'd be the first practical step. I'm assuming you're already putting out your sermon on YouTube, in the broad format, the long form. I'd say start cutting up those sermons, adding some music underneath them, and then Instagram has a feature where the text will actually pop up with what you're saying. So boom.
Sometimes you need to edit it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, cutting it up is editing, right? I mean, yeah. Sometimes
make sure to review it before you post it.
But I think that's it. I think that's some low hanging fruit you can do.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I want to add is doing. So this might sound funny, but doing like wake up and give people. So if you're the pastor, I would say being able to talk to your community, talk to your congregation like directly is such a win, I think. And so I would wake up about 3 times a week and do a like morning devo.
Mm-hmm.
Let the congregation hear from you. Like talk about the stresses of the day, talk about what happened yesterday, talk about real life, but give a devo on how God is working on you currently in the season you're in. Yeah. And you could be like, listen, I ran out of coffee and I'm stressed out today because I have 6 meetings, but listen, God is still good and he's still faithful. Like, and do like 2-minute videos throughout the week and post those on any social media channels you want to. Those are 2 things that I think I would add to a smaller church if somebody asking, how do I do something practically?
And that Devo one, it was eye-opening. Max, one of our pastors here, he's an author and he's known worldwide. But during the pandemic, he started a daily little 5-10 minute YouTube. And it's him on his camera, not positioned well. Sometimes the lighting's black. Sometimes it's a little blurry. But it was that message. It was that one-on-one time with the pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part.
It spoke volumes to people, and they started seeing numbers they hadn't seen before. Yeah, that's a good one.
I think that's the biggest part as a young creative, and maybe by themselves, is you don't need all the equipment. And just like you were saying, it's raw in the moment. It's with your phone, and that's the authenticity. It's what TikTok's done. It's what Instagram's done. It's Reels. It's no editing. It's just in the moment, do it. Yeah. But I do think, the easiest factor is you don't have a big team. You're already broadcasting your service. Go ahead and just chop that up and turn that into your social points. And I think it also depends on, where is your congregation sitting? What's going to really resonate with them? Is it a video podcast? Is it audio podcast? Is it, what can you chop up?
Yep.
Is it, maybe you don't have the video skills, but you're more graphic based. Are you designing graphics from quotes from the sermon and posting those instead? That's also a possibility. And there are tons of resources out there to help with the design if you're not a designer.
Quick shout out to Canva. I mean,
absolutely.
We're not getting any kickbacks, but Canva is a really great program for people that are starting out. Yep. So if they hear that you're listening to the sermon, you're like, man, this is a great point. Just put a graphic together. If you're not video centric and that one creative is more design centric, I think that's an excellent
And Canva can help with video now too.
Oh, really?
So it can do it.
Yep.
It can do a lot. It can revitalize your social media if grandma was just essentially posting on the church website, and that's all you had. Well, since you guys stole all my ideas,
we took all the good ones, so I wanted to go first. I was like, I already know what I want to say.
Because I was gonna give some homework because to me, the first thing is find out where your church is.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the big one. Is you have to understand where they are because I think you mentioned it. If you went on TikTok and started making a bunch of TikTok videos and 90% of your congregation isn't there, you're just spinning the wheel for no reason.
And it's a lot of work for no win.
Yeah. And then you're just getting upset for no reason. Yeah. I would say do some homework there. Do some homework on what is your church good at.
Okay.
Maybe your sermon are not the best, and that's not what you excel at. Maybe you excel at groups, and there's some testimonies that are happening in that group section.
Okay.
And you can go get your iPhone and ask them to tell a quick story. You're probably gonna have to cut it down because people could just talk and talk and talk. Mm-hmm. But hearing life change can bring about even more life change because people will see themselves in other people's stories.
Story.
Yep. Yeah. And they're drawn to that. So you have to figure out who's that communicator that needs to be highlighted. Because sometimes it's not the worship pastor or it's not the senior pastor. It might be somebody else. It might be the children's minister. So you have to be able to have an honest discussion and say, what are we actually good at? There's a scene in Three Amigos where it's like, what are you gonna, we can sew. Well, great, you can sew. Yeah. But you have to do that. Yeah. Take that pulse with your church and see, maybe your children's ministry is amazing. And maybe that needs to be your focus in the digital marketplace is children's ministry.
Yeah. Especially if you have a lot of young families in the church. Yeah. Highlighting that and making that your outcome for online. Yeah. And then, gearing it towards the parents, because, most of the kids in children's ministry probably aren't on social media.
Absolutely.
Or hopefully not just yet, depending on age ranges. Thinking of my own kid I'm going to have soon.
Yeah, you got to think about these things.
I know. And by the way, we never touched base. Do you have kids?
Yes.
Do you have kids?
I have a baby girl that was just born April 23rd.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We're not doing dates on the podcast, so I won't say the year. But she's about 2.5 months old right now. So a lot of sleep is over here. That's why I'm like knocking down this coffee because we're just, best sleep of my life right now. So yeah.
Don't miss those days. Don't miss those days. My baby is 13.
Yeah.
And in the other room. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he volunteers and runs camera. So it's like,
Come on.
So there's that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and showing that any age you can get them involved in tech.
Absolutely.
And there's an inspiration.
Yeah, his
and
younger
with some
brother,
training.
who's 9, is like, can I please? And I was like, you can't even reach the handles yet.
Yeah. But I mean, that's it. That is excellent. That's a great example of like how hey, come on over.
Yeah.
That's how we heard the gospel. That's how we learn to volunteer, serve. I mean, that's how we got interested in what we do is because somebody talked to us. Now, this doesn't really come across on a podcast, but we don't really take ourselves seriously in a sense. Like I know we kind of mentioned some accolades and how years in the game. I want us to tell the people what's our like funniest, biggest mistake / biggest mistake we've made working in creative at the church.
There is so many.
Right?
There is. I hate to say there's so many, but when you're dealing, you're always trying to, as a creative, you're always trying new things.
Yeah.
And with trying new things, there's always a point of failure. There's always something. We had tried to do kind of pull in the online experience to show off what the church is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're running around with our wireless gimbal camera, and we forgot to turn off the mic on top that was feeding through and the handheld. So you're hearing our camera guy talk, hey, scoot to the left, hey, scoot to the right, do this. And you're hearing their whole conversation on the live stream, which was awesome. And you're getting people online, hey, no, I think you scoot to the right, and, critiquing the camera guy's work. And you're like,
we know better.
That's awesome.
And then I'm like, hey, do you want to volunteer? Do you want to? So almost it was a kind of a recruitment opportunity in a sense. What else? We've had the pastor decided, hey, I want to be in control of my own mute. Forgot to mute, goes use the restroom. Everybody hears the flush.
Yeah.
That's always an awkward one. I'm pretty sure almost every church has experienced that once in their life.
Or a pastor who can't sing. Max can write great books, but he can't.
So we put that on the live stream.
Yeah.
We put our pastor's mic one time on the live stream of him singing before and it was, it's loud. It's all you hear. Because everything else in the background.
Over the top.
Yeah.
This is pretty funny.
No auto-tune, right?
Oh, no, it was raw. Well, there's auto-tune on that line anyway. Yeah. Another one we did was I left the music on by accident. It was when we first started live streaming at my old church. We had we have like a lo-fi playlist, so not worship at all. And it was, it was bumping, just some nice hip hop vibes. And then the, pastor's going, and then we weren't paying attention to the chat, and we started looking at the chat, and everybody's like, yo, I can't hear anything. Is the pastor preaching? I see him on the stage. What is going on? Oh,
he's not in tempo to the beat of the song.
So that was a fun one to explain to leadership. What you got, Adam?
I think, man, I don't think I've really made any mistakes over the years.
Whoa.
I try to always have a fall guy so that it's not on me.
It's not my mistake. It was that other volunteer.
Yeah.
No, I remember we made a sermon open video, and we thought it was the coolest thing ever. And 2 weeks in, pastors came and talked to us and was like, hey, we're going to need to pull the video. Why is it so scary?
You told me about this one.
And I was like,
a Matrix.
what do you mean? And I had a lot of pride. And I was like, well, this is amazing. This is art. It's supposed to invoke emotion. And we pulled it. Because it was like, I could see what they were saying. Like, it was very, like, kids were getting scared. I was like,
What?
That's probably not the mood you're going for right before a sermon's supposed to start. So
how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah.
Have you had that happen with a motion background? I had a motion background I thought was the coolest of like orbs and stuff moving for a worship song. And someone came to me and said it looked like a Dementor from Harry Potter coming through and they couldn't focus during worship. And it wasn't just one. Like, I was like, well, let's just see if it was just one person. And the second service hits and it's like, no, two more people. And I was like, okay, we're just going to scratch that packages.
I got a prayer request one time that was given to me by the prayer ministry. And apparently somebody had written on the prayer request, I pray you never use white font on yellow background ever again.
And then you responded,
like, okay,
join our team.
I guess we won't do that anymore. I guess that's too hard to read for some individuals. But yeah, there's been tons of things where it's like you're almost not sure if it's personal preference, but
that's fair though.
Yeah, it kind of irks you the wrong way. I mean, I can't tell you how many mistakes I've covered up as a video editor.
Oh yeah.
Or it's like, oh, I forgot to record the audio and let me And then you show him the video. It's like, oh, where's the speaking parts? I was like, no, I went a different direction.
We scratched that. We thought it was more imagery based.
That was the nice thing of having the full editing control was I was able to hide a lot of my mistakes or embarrassing things. I remember one time I was in Brazil and we were filming, and the pastor was like, oh, there's this amazing sand dune that you can get this great view on. And am not completely in shape, and I'm going up on this dude and I'm recording it, and then I truck up and I get the shot, and then we come back down. Well, while the editor was editing it, he just starts laughing, and I'm like, what's going on? And on the video where I'm halfway up the dune, you just hear me going
camera's all pointed down and you're just trying to survive.
I was like, looking at your shoes, trying to hold it steady. But those are some of the fun things.
Those are the great ones, man.
That you can, Luckily, nobody ever had to hear that other than that video editor, but there's some funny ones.
Man, if you're not making mistakes, I don't think you're challenging yourself enough. Honestly.
For sure.
I know Craig Rochelle always says it.
One last one. It was so bad. I thought it was funny to do a blooper reel from video announcements. And I decided to take some scenes where there was hiccups, words, and sometimes when you mess up, you play around. It's like, oh man, I'll get it on the next time. Our children's pastor at a previous church had swung his arm, slapped the mic, and he's like, oh no. I decided to bleep it.
Oh no!
And throw a sensor, his hands went up, and I thought it was hilarious. Did not run it by our pastor at all, and just threw it in the Sunday announcement. He thought it was hilarious. I got about 6 emails from kids, parents that saying, did the children's pastor really swear? And I was like, no, it was just a blooper. And I had to go back in and undo the bleep, throw it back in. We all thought it was funny, like, bleep, like cut, go to the next shot. And I was like, oh.
Anytime you
what was really funny, not so funny.
Issue a retraction. Yeah, you messed up.
Oh yeah,
100%. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. I think we all agree that the value that the digital shift has brought and what creative roles have brought is just the ability to reach more people with the gospel. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, what we do is all about reaching the most people with the gospel that we can. Whether that's television, whether that's social media, whether that's just simply putting your sermon up. And let me just encourage everyone real quick. Honestly, putting your sermon up, that's great. Let's just be clear. That is awesome. Reaching people with the gospel is awesome. No matter how you do it, just continue to do what you do. What we're offering are just different ways to do it, more ways to do it, but you just putting out a sermon, that's a win. All right. So I don't want anyone to feel like a failure or feel like, we'll never be there, or we'll be there in like 10 years or 5 years. We just don't have the budget. It's not feasible. Let me just say, you preaching, that is a win.
Even if it's just audio, it doesn't have to be video.
100%. Reaching people for the gospel, that is the mission, and that's what we get excited about. That's why we want to come beside churches. And I mean, I remember during the pandemic, I know you guys have too, but like we helped churches set up live streams that were smaller churches. I mean, we care, we genuinely care. Yeah. And so, let us know in the comments if you guys have any other questions for us. This has been an amazing episode. I just want to say thank you guys for joining me. This is fun. This is awesome. We're going to have to do another one. But seriously, make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you tell your friends and your family about Moment by Moment. We're in full swing of season 4. And also, we just dropped some new merch. So make sure you go to our website and check out our new merch drop. I'm wearing one of our
I was just about to ask.
Yes. So, shameless plug. I'll turn around. But so make sure you check out our new merch. But thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you all next Monday. We drop new episodes every Monday. So we'll see you guys next week.